Hello and welcome to the Heat Check Podcast, the Miami Herald, Miami Heat Podcast. I'm David Wilson, and I'm joined, as always, on the other line from the Queen City. Is that what they call it? From Charlotte, North Carolina.
The Queen City, yeah.
About to head back to Miami after a tight Heat win on Monday night. I hope people watch that instead of the Dolphins. I guess you could watch both. I watched some of both, obviously. But anyway, Heat get the win last night. Anthony headed back to Miami now. Anthony, how was this quick little one-game road trip? How are things going? It's been feels like every week we've come on and had kind of similar stuff to talk about. Still feels the same way. The Heat kind of settling into who they are, maybe a little bit. That's going to kind of be our main topic of discussion here because middle of the pack in basically everything. But in this Eastern Conference, I don't know, still seem like they're have a chance to kind of hang with pretty much anyone in this conference is the way I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think they wouldn't say this because they think they always have enough, but I think they're just trying to stay above water right now. I mean, they're missing 3 starters, 2 of their best players in Bam and Tyler now for 3 or 4 straight games. They're 13-10, which again, it could be worse considering all the road games and injuries they've faced. I mean, they go home for 6 out of 7.
So big stretch coming up.
Big stretch. Not, next few games are against softer opponents. You have another one against Charlotte on Wednesday. You have 2 against the Bulls, two in a row against the Bulls on Thursday and Saturday. But then you have Minnesota, then you have Orlando, then you have Philly. So it's not easy, but you get a sustained stretch at home now before you have to go to the West Coast. So this is an important few weeks. We'll see if the Heat get any guys back. But right now, it's like, I feel like you and I have been saying the same thing now for the last 3 weeks because after that little winning streak they had, it's pretty much been like
500, right? It's
500, maybe a little under 500.
A little under 500, I guess.
Yeah, but it's just like they've won 1, lost 2, won 2, lost. It's just been kind of like a
they've alternated wins basically since the start of the month. So
right,
wins and losses. 6-7, and it obviously culminates with that Christmas game against Philly. So it's like an important stretch, one, because you have a chance to stack some wins when you're at home, but also like it's going to be telling, like you kind of mentioned. Like you finish that with Philly on Christmas, a night game on Christmas too. So I feel like the vibe of a night Christmas game is even different than a noon Christmas game, where it almost like those noon games almost feel like exhibition-y, right? Or those. Right. I'm sure you've covered both at this point in your.
I've only covered one Christmas Day game, and it was at noon.
It was a noon game against New Orleans, a couple years back.
And the arena was empty because it was like I think it was
a COVID
bubble.
Right?
Yeah. So it was very strange. Yeah.
But anyway, those noon games always have a little bit more of, I think, like an exhibition, like glorified preseason game almost. Whereas those, I mean, some of those night games over the years, like I think of some of those, the Golden State and the Clippers used to play all the time. Like it's a different energy, I think. So. And important. It's going to be, they obviously get Minnesota at home, which is kind of like when they lost that early in the year, it looked like a terrible loss. Now Minnesota's obviously been great. So a very interesting stretch. And, just looking at the East standings with the Heat, I think are in 8th place right now. Obviously, and as this will, it's kind of change every day because they're in 8th place, but they're 4 games out of the 1 seed, I think, right? Like the bunching in the Eastern Conference is pretty crazy. So the Heat are like treading water, which I think is pretty
not the worst thing.
It's not the worst thing because these teams that probably should not be treading water, like, Boston and Milwaukee, these teams that I don't know, I think both of us thought were going to kind of be a cut above everyone in the East. Even they haven't like separated themselves at all in the East. It is really bunched up. Obviously, some new teams have emerged, like Indiana, it feels like is kind of going to be here to stay now after this. We'll see. But obviously the in-season tournament run and the way Tyrese Halliburton is playing, like you kind of always figured that there was going to be someone would emerge because that's how it tends to go, right? We knew Boston, we knew Milwaukee, we knew Philly. We thought Miami was going to be in that like top 5, top 6. Figured someone else is going to emerge. We've got Indiana, we've got Orlando, but it's still like wide open. And for the Heat to be treading water the way they are, I actually like could do a lot worse.
Yeah, definitely. Considering all the players they're missing, I mean, they've used the league leading 14 different starting lineups. So yeah, it could definitely be a lot worse. I guess the one thing I would say is, and we've touched on this, is they've played a lot of road games. I think they're tied for the most, 14 through the first 23. That's well documented. But they really, the last good team they've beaten. I'm trying to look here because my internet here is very shaky for some reason, even though this video is working. But I'm having trouble accessing their schedule. But off the top of my head, I guess Cleveland on the road, but Cleveland was without like Isaac Okoro and Donovan Mitchell. So yes, I mean the Heat have been trying it themselves, but
Indiana, right? Beat Indiana one game. Like,
yeah,
Indiana, they're pretty good. But
that's
yeah,
true.
I guess
Indiana will be the last one, but they've had a softer schedule.
Yes, they have.
In terms of opponents
rankings, but
that's what I've been trying to look up to success. But I know like a week ago it was down. It was pretty down there. Which again is not an indictment on the Heat. You play who's on your schedule, and last year this was an issue for them where they couldn't beat bad teams. Like they struggled against them. So it's a good thing that they're taking advantage of this part of their schedule. But I'm really interested to see A, when this team gets healthy, what it looks like, and B, when they're healthy.
I believe if I'm looking at this right, they're 21st.
Yeah. So there you go.
Schedule.
So and it's gonna get a lot tougher. So hopefully, like just for us as like observers of the team, and also for the Heat because they want to do well. Hopefully they can get some guys back because it's so hard to make any judgments on this roster or on the team's play when they're missing so many important players. Like
it's like, would you feel a lot better if they had like not gotten killed by Cleveland last week right at home? Like if they had won a game like that, like or maybe had one of those two on the back-to-back in New York. Like there's a couple where you're like, oh man, that's a pretty tough loss, or like probably should be a couple games better, but at the same time, it just feels like it's been so hard to like actually learn a lot about this team because this team is going to be judged. Well, like one, you mentioned all the guys being out, but this team's really going to be judged on what they do against Milwaukee, Boston, Philly, and maybe Orlando. Like we'll see. Orlando, the one road game is, as you mentioned in this 6 and 7 is at Orlando. That'll be really interesting. It's a road game, but easy travel, right, for the team, and a one-game little trip. And
there's usually more Heat fans at Amway Center.
Yeah, and there'll be a lot of Heat fans there.
Yeah.
And Orlando, I think, is second in the East right now as we're talking. Like, they're good. I mean, I think everyone assumes they're going to fall off at some point. It looks like they should be a top 6, top 7 team in the East, certainly. But, they've going to have some interesting. The next couple are pretty easy. Charlotte, Chicago twice. And then it gets tricky. Minnesota at Orlando. And then, as we mentioned, that Philly game on Christmas. So I'm very much looking forward to that stretch that come next week, I guess. Yeah, next week.
Next week. Yes. And that's why I say I just hope that they can get a couple guys back, whether it's just Bam or just something so that we could get some type of read, right, about where this team stands. But right now, currently where it stands, in a vacuum, don't think about injuries or anything. They're 14th in offensive rating, 14th in defensive rating, 15th in net rating.
Yeah.
And
Jimmy Butler got asked about it. I don't know who asked the question last week, just like about where the situation of the team, and he summed it up. Mediocre. Offense has been mediocre, he said. Talk about our defense has been mediocre. That's the word I use, mediocre. 14th in offense, as you're about to say, 14th in defense. 15th in net rating. Mediocre sounds harsh because I think the connotation of mediocre is like below average, but really the Heat has been the most average team in the NBA, basically.
They pretty much are. They are the definition of average right now in the NBA. And that's what they've been this season to the first 23 games. And last year they were below average for most of the season. So it's actually an improvement on last season. But yeah, I mean, that's not where he wants to be, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Now you consider all the injuries and you say, okay, well, again, things could be worse, but
also the soft schedule, like it kind of goes back. Like
it goes back to
nitpick, like they should be better, but maybe they're actually worse.
Right. I think the bottom
feels about right.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is we still don't know what this team is, which is crazy to say because it's pretty much the same roster as last season.
Yeah, we're 2 months into a new season.
Yeah. And we're 2 months into a new season, but it's just the way it's been. I mean, Bam, Tyler, Jimmy have only played together in 6 of the first 23 games. It's a fourth of the season they've been able to play together. So we need to see that. Until then, it's kind of just like a wait and see. But the other criticism of this team is it's never healthy, right? So we could say, well,
we
when
knew
they
it
get
was
healthy,
going to happen, right? We knew Jimmy was going to miss 20 games. We knew Kyle Lowry, although he's actually been the guy out there more than anyone, like, or pretty much anyone. We knew he was going to miss 15 games or whatever. Like, they're an older roster, and their most important guy, their most important guy is older, and has never, it just seems like he's never going to play more than 60 games in a season at this point again in his career, which is kind of standard for a lot of the mid 30s stars, right? Like, other than LeBron last year, who decided he wanted to play in every single game, right? And then Kyle Lowry, who I think coming into the year we would have said he's like the fourth most important guy on this team, fifth most important guy. We knew he was going to miss a bunch of time. The problem has been that Tyler Hero is just like, again, he's kind of injury prone right now. I think we said that last week. He doesn't feel like it because the injuries have kind of all been different. Like, it's not like
freak injuries too.
Yeah, it's not like
it's soft
broken
tissue
hand, right? It's not like he's got a knee problem that keeps nagging at him. But he's missed a lot of time now over the last 2 years, basically.
Yeah, and it's a shame that like you said, two of the guys who have been hurt, not only are they their best players, but they're two of the youngest players. So it's not like, yes, the team is older. Jimmy's actually been available. He missed a few games, but he's been available more than those two.
Right.
Kyle Lowry's played a ton of minutes this year already. So it's almost like when Tyler and Bam do come back eventually, which I would expect at some point this month they will be back, but there's still no clear timetable on that. Right. Then it's going to be Jimmy and Kyle's turn to take some games off, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, that's the way last season was for the Heat. It seems like that's the way this season's going to be for the Heat. And yes, you could say, well, it all worked out for them in the playoffs last year. They caught lightning in a bottle. But to expect that again is just, that's expecting a lot. Yeah. So they have to find a way to get, they'll probably never be 100% healthy, and obviously they won't because Drew Smith is out for the season, but they got to find a way to get their core together.
Yeah,
because
like Drew Smith out for the season, we didn't even know if he was going to be in the rotation at the start of the year. It's
right. But they got to get their leading three together because those guys need the reps. As much as they played together the last few years, their games have changed. Tyler and Bam are taking on bigger offensive roles. We've talked about that, how it's kind of affected the fourth quarter offense and just kind of working through that stuff. They need those reps.
Yeah.
So it's important that those guys, when Bam and Tyler are back, that Jimmy also stays healthy. Yeah. Because if not, it's just going to be a constant shuffling of the deck.
Yeah. That is, to me, a huge part of the reason why that stretch we talk about next week is so interesting because, one, maybe, it gives us a week to maybe Bam, Tyler can get back out there at some point during that stretch. But this team, I think they're just going to be, I think they'll probably end up better than 15th in net rating by the end of the year. I'd guess they'll be around 10, just based on the talent on this roster and, again, the fact that they've missed so many guys for so long. But this team is ultimately going to be judged. They're going to win. I don't know, what's their pace right now? It feels like their pace now is about let's see, 5, 6.
Probably 45 wins or so.
Yeah, it feels like they're going to be 46 win pace right now. It feels like they're going to be in that range probably around the end of the season, maybe a little better, 48. Does not feel like it's a 50-win team. But I think just this team's going to be judged on what they can do against the good teams they play, and that is the one thing I think that we have not seen yet this season is they, as you mentioned, they just don't have a lot of really impressive wins yet. They don't have a lot of bad losses, as we said, either. Like they fixed that, which was such a problem last year. But that stretch, you'd love to see to get, and guys are going to come in and out over a 2-week sample or whatever. But you'd love to see guys in that Minnesota, Orlando. You got an Atlanta game in the middle of that, but otherwise, you go Minnesota, Orlando, Philly, and then a really tough West Coast trip. Games at Golden State. Two in LA, as always, at Phoenix. The West Coast has been pretty rough for the Heat over the last few seasons. Really, the entire Jimmy Butler. I can't remember them having an impressive West Coast swing at any point. But so you'd love to just see the team a little healthy for some of those matchups and see you can win some of those games, because that's the one thing I think that is missing from what we've seen on this team's resume so far. Because I think they are going to be what they kind of are in the regular season, and that is a team that is probably somewhere between like 8th and 13th or something in net rating. The other way I think this team can just normalize, improve a little bit. So we talk about the reason for optimism is all the guys are out. The reason for pessimism is how soft the schedule has been for the most part. Obviously, with the caveat of the road games. The other reason for optimism is, I think, just the fourth quarter and how bad it's been. Like, if you're a believer, like I think we are, that some of those numbers normalize. Obviously, some people will be just like, oh, they don't have the will to win. They don't have that clutch, whatever. But 28th in offensive rating, 27th in net rating.
In the fourth quarter, yeah.
In the fourth quarter, they can't be that bad. Like, there's so many terrible teams in the NBA. They're not.
Yeah.
I mean,
they shouldn't be that bad.
Like,
no.
You look at the Wizards, the Pistons, and the Spurs. Those are 3 all-time terrible teams. Like, the Heat have to be better than those teams, which they aren't right now in fourth quarter.
Yeah, it's kind of inexplicable. Like they have a positive net rating in each of the first 3 quarters. I think if you take out the fourth quarter, they're probably like a top 5 team.
Yeah, they have it's top 6, top 7. That can't be worse than that.
It's just crazy. I think it's hard to explain. I guess you look at, like, I'm looking at the numbers right now, and I mean, 3-point percentage. They've been one of the better 3-point shooting teams in the league.
Yeah.
For the season, I think they were top 5 or top 6 entering last night against Charlotte, and in the fourth quarter, I think they're at 33%, which is not good. So they're making less of their threes. Their opponents, I think, are shooting like 37%. So opponents are shooting well from 3. I mean, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
That's not all of it. I think also, again, just like everything, injuries play a role. Jimmy always rests usually the first 6 minutes of the fourth quarter. And now without Bam and Tyler.
Yeah, their rotation, the way they manage their rotations are kind of like, some teams, the way your rotations work are going to affect it. The way their rotations work, their plan is to go into the fourth quarter with a lead, let a little bit of it slip, and then close it out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's what they've done for the most part. They usually enter the fourth quarter with a lead, considering how good they've been in the first 3 quarters. But then, the first 5 or 6 minutes without Jimmy on the court, and now Bam and Tyler are out, so you don't have your best 3 players. Like, there aren't many teams that could survive a 6-minute stretch in the fourth quarter without their 3 best players in the court. That's a lot to ask. Yes, the Heat are deep, and that's a strength of this team, but that's a lot to ask of a roster to survive late in the game without the 3 best players, 3 best offensive players. So I think that plays a huge role. Now, like, the counterpoint to that is there are fourth quarter issues even when all 3 were healthy early in the year. It was a smaller sample. It was only 6 games or so that they were all 3 together. But fourth quarter there were still issues. So it is something that, like, I feel like we can't ignore anymore. Because I think at first it was kind of like, oh, well, it's small sample size. Like, it'll be fine. It's going to normalize. And yes, I still kind of feel that way, especially when you look at the 3-point numbers. I think a lot of times 3-point numbers are more like luck than anything, Like, it's not an indictment of the shot you're getting. It's more just sometimes they're going to go in, sometimes they're going to go out, and they just haven't gone in at the same rate in the fourth quarter. But it's definitely worth monitoring because it has been, aside from injuries, probably the biggest on-court problem for the Heat this year, fourth quarters, which, again, last season was a strength. They were one of the better fourth quarter teams. So it's weird. I don't know what the reason is. I don't think players know what the reason is. I think I told you last week I spoke to a few guys, and they said, I think it's more mental than anything. Like, they're because they usually enter the fourth quarter with a lead. They kind of like let foot off the gas, and I know it's kind of cliche, but that could be part of it. But they have to fix it. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, they don't have when you have Bam and Tyler out, and obviously Jimmy sits, like you said, the first 5-6 minutes of every fourth quarter. This team is deep, but there's not another guy who just can get a shot, right? Jaquez has kind of been the closest thing to that, right? But they don't have. I mean, and it's not a super big indictment. You're missing your 3 best players, but a lot of teams have a bench guy who can just is
Right.
a shot maker, and this team just
Like
doesn't
a Jamal
have,
Crawford or something like that.
yeah. I can't think of who like Jordan Clarkson or whatever. I can't think of who the current prototype of that guy is, but
Jordan Poole, that type of
yeah. Theoretical Jordan Poole, yes. But yeah, like this team just doesn't have. I mean, they're other than those three, they just don't have that on this roster. So it's very tough to like sustain offense for a 6-minute stretch like that by just doing Heat stuff. And the Heat stuff is fun. I love the Heat stuff, but you sometimes like
you need guys. You need your guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need your guys. I mean, have you not seen Duncan Robinson play this year? He's getting.
It's true. I mean, Duncan Robinson, is he the fourth best shot getter on this team? Like it's.
Yeah, I would think
good.
He's. I mean, that's another pod for another week, but he has been a different guy this season. But yeah, I mean, they have a lot of really good complementary guys around that should theoretically help the three best players, whether that's Jaime, whether that's Duncan, whether that's Caleb, Kevin Love. They have a lot of guys who complement the leading trio. But when the leading trio isn't on the court, because two are injured and one is having his usual rest at the start of the fourth quarter, it's just tough. So I think people have to come to grips with that, and like you need your guys. I know like Spo always says we have enough. It's not about injuries. We've shown we could play well. It's about sustaining the level of play. And yes, that's all well and good. It's true. They have built big leads while being shorthanded, but it's hard to sustain that for an entire 48 minutes when you don't have your best players, especially when you're playing in a half of a quarter without three of your best players because Jimmy's resting. So
yeah, I'm trying to think. That must be the longest stretch that Jimmy gets on the bench. I'm trying to think like end of the first quarter into the second.
I think the second as well. He sits because he either plays the entire first quarter or he leaves with like a minute left in the first quarter, and then he'll like sit the first 4 or 5 minutes of the second quarter as well. So I think that second quarter it's kind of similar.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, I think their second quarter rating is a positive, but it's not as good as the first quarter net rating is like top 5.
So the other part of it is it's different, right? Like in the second quarter, guys are still kind of like just going through the motions in an NBA game. Like not to disparage the work ethic and how hard guys play, but it's the second quarter of a game. You're still just like building up points to get to the stretch run and then see what happens at the end. Whereas the fourth quarter, then if you're down by 18 points going into the fourth quarter, or I don't know, what was the New York game like? Obviously, it's not usually that dramatic. 12 points, 10 points, whatever the Heat usually lead going into the fourth quarter. The other team is like all of a sudden there's urgency, and I don't know, could you see? I mean, I don't think I would. Could you see them altering the rotation at all not the rotation, but like the minutes distribution, like maybe more rest for Jimmy in the first quarter? And again, it's like he's going to play I don't know how many minutes per game he's averaging this year, but he's going to play the same minutes no matter what. Do you think there's any merit to restructuring where those minutes would go? And do you think it's even realistic that Spo would even consider it? Or are we just like, Tyler and Bam are going to be back soon? Like, we just got to
change it up. Yeah. I think the other option would be just to get him out earlier in the third
get him out
quarter,
early.
I guess.
The third quarter would be the other option.
4 minutes, like he plays the first 7 minutes, 8 minutes of the third quarter, then sits like the final 4 of the third quarter, and then the first 2 of the fourth quarter.
And who knows if that even would matter, right? Because
so you're still without him for 6 minutes.
Rating.
You're
up by 7 instead of 10.
Yeah, so it's tough to he's not going to play 40 minutes. Jimmy's always going to play around 36, 35 minutes.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Now since Tyler and Bam have both been out, he's brought Jimmy in a few times a little earlier than usual, on the 8-minute mark of the fourth quarter, maybe a couple minutes earlier than usual, when he sees the lead slipping away. Spo will call on Jimmy a minute or two earlier.
Yep.
But that's pretty much, I think, the only adjustment you're going to make at this point, because again, he's going to play 35, 36 minutes. He's not going to play more than that. And if you're playing well in the third quarter and you're building a lead, why are you going to take him out? You know, just like last night, they built a 14-point lead late in the third quarter. Why are you taking Jimmy out at that point? Just keep him in there, and then hope that you could just at least, like you said, maybe you got to score by 2 or 4 points in the beginning of fourth quarter, but you're still up by 10 when he comes back. That's the goal.
And you should win those minutes. That's the other thing. If you're up by 6 points when Jimmy Butler comes back into the game, you should win the game. Now, they haven't
Right.
done. I mean, they've done it for the most part, right? They have a winning record, but the losses get like thrown under the microscope because then you look at these big picture numbers in the fourth
it's a
quarter.
trend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all that to say, the Heat need their guys.
Yep.
to be for us to really get a read on this team, for them to fix some of the issues that they're currently facing, for them not to be mediocre. I honestly think, considering how many guys they've been missing, mediocre isn't bad for right now.
Yeah.
It's their whole like
when we say they're on a
holding the fort down.
46 win pace, like feels about right considering what has gone wrong. Like this should be a 48 win team or whatever, and that feels very much within reach.
Yeah, and if this continues when they're healthy, then that'll be
the concern.
Alarming. But right now, I think we just have to kind of, it's boring to say, but just wait until this team gets a little healthier, and then we can kind of see where things stand.
Yeah, they play Minnesota next Monday. I'm done with my first semester exams. Hurricane season is over. We're going to lock in on that one, and I think we'll come back after that one, and that'll be a really good game to kind of just break down more in depth because no matter who's playing, it'll be telling because this team, a win in that game would pretty much be their best win of the year at this point.
Yeah, for sure. If Minnesota's healthy entering that game, if they can beat Minnesota at home, that would be their best win of the season. I think right now the best win of the season maybe is like the Lakers at home, maybe Cleveland on the road.
Lakers,
I guess Cleveland on the road.
Cleveland on the road is pretty good, but
Minnesota.
Is Minnesota, are they number one in the West still? Like that'd be a nice.
They're up there. I think they are. I think they are. But yeah, it's hopefully we'll find out by next time we speak. We'll find out a little more about this team. They'll be healthier and they'll face a Minnesota team that's one of the best in the league up to this point. So maybe that game will tell us something. I guess.
You think Tyler Bam? Like what's the latest you're hearing?
It's tough.
Wrap up?
I had heard Tyler was going to come back, aiming to come back. I feel like we've been saying
it feels good for like a month straight on him, pretty much.
Yeah, I had heard he was aiming to come back this week, and I don't know if that's going to happen anymore. There's really been no definitive update. He was shooting after practice over the weekend. He looked good without a limp. So that's a good sign, but I don't know how close he is to returning. I don't think he's been part of a full practice yet, full contact practice. Bam, I asked Eric Spoelstra about him yesterday. He traveled to Charlotte. I kind of think he traveled to Charlotte only because he's from there.
He's from there?
More than anything. And Spo basically said that. He said there's still no timetable. I wouldn't read too much into him being on this trip. He wanted to be around the guys. He wanted to be here. That's pretty much it. So it doesn't seem like, I don't think Bam's going to be out much longer, but it doesn't seem like he's like on the cusp of returning. I could be wrong. Haywood Highsmith, I just don't know. That's a tricky injury. When you have the bruised, it's called a lower back contusion, I guess, but it's pretty much like a bruised tailbone. That's tricky. He re-aggravated. He came back after a game or two, hurt it again, and now he's been out for the last 2 or 3 games. So it's more of a pain tolerance thing, I think, for him at this point.
Yeah. So hopefully, we get a week pretty much to see if these guys can at least getting one of them back for the Minnesota game, I think would be pretty exciting. And then, like we said, if the schedule ramps up from there. So they're going to need their guys back. Anyway, Anthony's got to go catch a flight. Thanks, as always, for listening. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chang. You have any Dolphins thoughts before we go? No? Okay. Shaking his head.
It's the story of my life. In 4 minutes. That was it. That was the story of my life in 4 minutes.
Oh, my God. I still can't believe that. But I got to say, I really needed a big Tua game to make my fantasy playoffs, and he kind of
didn't happen last night.
But no. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. Hopefully be able to watch the Heat a little bit more as we move forward here. I've been kind of checking in and out in the middle of finals. Obviously, football season pretty much over. Anthony, do you want to do a Boca Bowl podcast with me? I'm going to go to the Syracuse USF game in Boca Raton, Florida next week. I'm pretty excited for that one.
I think I'm unavailable for that one. Let me check my schedule.
I'll be attending that with Adam Beasley, former Herald writer, who is equally fired up to see the Cuse in town.
That's awesome. I didn't realize they were in that bowl. That's good for you.
Yeah. Won't be going to the Pinstripe Bowl, unfortunately. They kind of be in New York right before, but couldn't make the trip quite work. So, but we got lots of basketball to watch. In-season tournament, I think for the most part, a success for the NBA.
there was some enthusiasm for it.
I think the Tyrese Halliburton thing is like, obviously LeBron won, but like whatever. To me, the Tyrese Halliburton like coming out party in it, I think is the biggest victory. That's to me what the in-season tournament should be about. You want obviously you need the good guys to care, and the fact that Giannis and LeBron made it to the semifinals, like you need that. If it was just a bunch of Tyrese Halliburtons and Orlando Magic's and
it wouldn't be the same.
New Orleans Pelicans, it wouldn't be the same. But having like one guy kind of like rise to the occasion and go toe to toe with some of the best players in the league, I think that's the big success. But now we like really move into like the exciting part of the NBA calendar, and I think that was the in-season tournament gets you kind of bridges the gap to this December run up to Christmas that is so important for the league.
Yeah, it was kind of cool to see guys play like, I don't know if it's like playoff basketball, but like they were going hard in December.
Yeah, harder,
yeah. And it's like you said, I think it's also a good opportunity for teams that don't get showcased on national TV much, like in the Indiana Pacers and Tyrese Halliburton, to be showcased at that stage.
15 biggest stars in the league or something like that.
Yeah, and I think this tournament helped him. Like it did. Like he was great before then, but just getting for people to get the opportunity to see him play, like on that stage in Vegas, and even just throughout the tournament, his performances, like, and kind of make the Pacers into an in-season tournament contender.
Yeah.
And just the media coverage that surrounded it. Like there was a lot of media coverage around it too. There were a lot of national reporters in Vegas, a bunch of people doing Tyrese Halliburton stories. Like that's all good for the league to have markets like that get showcased.
Yeah, and I think importantly, like obviously the NFL will dominate the next month, but before it felt like when like those Christmas games came, like it was like you had to catch up on like, oh, what's happening? I don't even know what's happening in the NBA right now.
That's what everyone says. Like Christmas is like the start of like when people pay attention.
And now you had like Pacers, I assume, don't play on Christmas. I actually don't have the full slate, but like you tune in on Christmas, and there's been NBA in the news within the last month, which like, frankly, if you're just like a casual sports fan, like that just was not the case. In past years.
Yeah.
All right.
That's a very good point.
All right. Thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.